Bex Milford, aka Cosmic Cures, is a writer, journalist, and astrologer who takes us on a journey to understand and redefine astrology from a mystic art to a useful tool to help us understand our relationships with ourselves, with each other, and with the world around us. In this beautiful conversation, we discuss the importance of self inquiry, the art of surrender, and using mindfulness in times of great challenge. We also break down some of the misconceptions about practices like astrology, deep dive into the power and purpose of human spirituality, and why everyone is a believer in some form. It's always a pleasure to talk to Bex, and I'm sure you'll enjoy this beautiful conversation as much as I did. Good morning, Bex Milford. How are you today?
I am feeling very good, very excited to be on this podcast, thrilled to be chatting to you again. How are you today?
I'm great. That's such a classic answer to hear from you. If I ever ask you a question, it's always so like positively and joyfully responded to. So very on brand. There's a lot to talk about with you today, and I'm really excited about it. I'm going to start actually by telling you a very short story, which I think is a really good lead into our conversation. And it's actually about a very short conversation that you were privy to between myself and my fiance Haley. And I think we were talking to you about a ongoing conflict that we've had in our relationship, very very minor conflict, but something that we've never managed to resolve, and that is when we plan things together, whether that's an afternoon or a holiday or our whole lives. uh, Haley is very much of the mindset that she wants to commit to that plan immediately, and she wants to, I suppose, symbolically commit to it. She just wants to be like, all right, that's what we're doing. And to her, it doesn't matter if we do or don't end up doing the thing. But for me, I am much less inclined to do that. And the way that my mind works is I start thinking about that plan in the context of a greater plan or a greater picture, and I start not catastrophizing it, but finding ways that it might not work and then seeking to address those things. And I'm much less inclined to want to be pinned down to that. I want to say, okay, that's a good idea. Like maybe let's pencil that in, or maybe we'll think about something else. And I think this sort of came to a head when we were driving to have dinner with you and we were talking about it. And you said something, you encapsulated the whole thing in one sentence. You said, well, to me, you said, and I'll paraphrase here, that's because you're an air sign and you don't want to be pinned down. And you said to Haley, that's because I'm going to try to remember, you're an earth sign, I think, and you're ready to just go and lock it in. And in that one sentence, you basically encapsulated 11 and a half years of this minor unresolved conflict that we've had. And that was the moment that I think you affirmed to me that, when I think about something like astrology, you really switched the perspective of what that was from this great mystic art that, metaphorically and literally exists in the clouds, to being more of a tool that someone could use to interpret themselves and interpret their relationships with themselves and with others and with the world around them. And that's what got me really excited to have you on this podcast, because I love to talk about tools and I love to talk about ways that we can use them to better ourselves and be better to other people. And I think that's a great place to start, is to perhaps talk about, you know, what I've heard you say before is your understanding of astrology as a tool, as a way to help yourself kind of move through this world. And I'd love for you to maybe talk a little bit about that and your take on that.
Yeah, thank you. What a great introduction. And you've encapsulated it as well in that I do view astrology as a tool. And if it was going to be any tool, perhaps I would see it as a compass, a real way of helping us find direction in our own lives, outward direction in actually how we make decisions, how we move forward, how we progress on this idea of a path of where we want to go, but also as an internal compass to help us check in with ourselves, to help us understand our reactions to things. And that kind of also mirrors this idea of astrology we have, which is as above, so below. And that is this idea that whatever is happening in the cosmos on a grander scheme, let's look at how the planets are moving, how we're orbiting around the sun, how they're moving through the different zodiac signs. This is reflected down here on Earth in what we're doing as a society and as individuals, and also within us. So it's this beautiful way of helping us place ourselves in this huge unknown that we're presented with, and it gives us so much potential for direction. And astrology is never going to be one of those things that has only one sort of one role that it takes in your life, or like one uh, definite answer. And it doesn't mean that also that you're locked into anything either. You know, people, let's go back to your great description then, and I do remember that conversation, and it's true, like air signs such as Aquarius, they need to have openness with things. They need to be able to keep the conversation going. And also, especially with Aquarians, we have an air sign that's also the water bearer. There's a sense of purification there. And the way that I like to look at that is, imagine that you are standing on this cliff overlooking this sort of like vast horizon of water, and you have the air all around you. And this is what Aquarians almost feel they need to do in life. They need to be able to see the horizon. They need to be able to know what's coming from all directions. You know, they feel comfortable in that sense. And if they're too tunnel visioned, that's when they get anxious. That's when they start to feel like they're being tied down. And like you say, catastrophizing comes from that. Whereas earth signs such as Haley, and she's both a earth sun with her Capricorn and also an earth moon with her Taurus. So she's double earth. And if you think of the way that, like when we think of the earth, and also Capricorn, the goat, and Taurus, the bull, they need to be on terra firma. They need that stability. And even if she doesn't necessarily want to go in that direction, she needs to feel like her feet are on solid ground so that she feels comfortable. Now, that doesn't mean that there's going to be clashes throughout life and that you're not compatible. There's no incompatible birth signs. It just means you have to be very aware of the direction that you both come from when you're making decisions. And there are high vibrations and low vibrations of each sign. And this is what astrology is, in essence, a tool for. It's understanding when you're embodying those higher vibrations. So for Aquarians, it's innovation, it's being able to think outside the box, it's always wanting to progress in some kind of way, it's always thinking a few steps ahead. Whereas with earth signs, their high vibrations are being able to take things and take solid steps towards what they want to achieve, and being able to organize and structure. So when you can recognize what each other needs in relationships, and this can be any relationship from family to friends to lovers, it means that you can start to adapt the things that make you comfortable in order to also make the people around you comfortable. And that's going to then bring about your other better qualities. And you can kind of like work in this beautiful symbiotic way of where the zodiac signs are bringing out the best in each other. So for me, astrology is about understanding myself in terms of my birth chart, and then plugging into those high vibrations so I can be the best version of me possible. But then it also allows me to have more compassion for others and helps me want to bring out that side of like their birth chart as well. So it's this beautiful tool for being able to feel like you're embodying your best self on a regular basis.
Once again, you've managed to encapsulate something that I deal with in a single sentence when you say Aquarians need to see the entire horizon because when I don't see it, I find that very uncomfortable. And that's
Exactly.
something that I've been working on really hard in my life for some time. And I believe, I feel that I am making progress, but it's that's like default patterning for me. If all is well, you know, if I feel like I'm swimming downstream and I can't see the horizon, okay. But if things start to get a little bit more challenging, that's when I'm like, I need to know everything now. And if I don't, I'm not going to be comfortable. That's so interesting.
Yeah, well, air signs tend to intellectualize things as well.
Mm.
So when you have like strong Gemini presence in your chart, which is another air sign, then you definitely tend to overthink things or overanalyze things. It's ruled by Mercury, so this is like the thinker, the communicator of the zodiac. And then Libra, the third air sign, really tends to worry about harmony in relationships and in sort of in the world around them, and overthinking their correspondence with others or their connection with others. So yeah, I'm a Libra rising, and I know that I have struggled in the past with people pleasing or wanting to do things at the detriment of what necessarily I really, really want, because I want to ensure that like the group is happy. And what's so interesting is that I've formulated this idea in my mind that that's who I am. And actually, no, I really, really like doing things for others. And that doesn't mean that you have to turn into a complete idiot and then become selfish, but it's a way of recognizing when you're not being true to yourself, when you're not being aligned. And I'm really interested at the moment in the concept of power and how we retain our power and how we leak our power. And when you look at your birth chart, it's this beautiful map of everything that you have the potential to be. And that's really important to remember. Your birth chart is a map of your potential, which is why I like to think of astrology as this compass. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to go in one direction through life, but say you have a map of a town and you want to get some bread, it's really useful you know where the bakery is, rather than just wandering from like place to place, just knocking on doors and hoping you're going to come across it. So astrology is kind of this tool of like, right, I want to better my communication with others, or I want to understand my approach to intimacy. I look at my birth chart and I see the corresponding planets and houses, and then I get these little nuggets of information about myself, and I use it as this compass in order to say, right, where am I slipping up a little bit? Where am I leaking my power in this sense because I'm not having boundaries? And where can I return to this sense of power, which for me is all about having compassionate agency? And compassionate agency means that you're doing what feels right for you and aligned for you, but you're also having compassion with the people around you and knowing that they're not necessarily going to get on board. So that's when it's really great to understand their birth signs as well, so you can kind of work as a team. And it's also having compassion for yourself and knowing that it's okay to slip up, to make mistakes, because all of it is part of this journey that you're on, which is this beautiful journey of life. And there's going to be challenges, and challenges are a good thing. I think we're so ingrained in the Western world to think that challenges are something that's very difficult and you just get your head down and you push through them. But I mean, you're a climber, right? You know, some of the most challenging times when you're on a climb, if you just stop and look around, you've also got the most staggering view. And I think that's how we should look at life sometimes. You're in the middle of a challenge, this too shall pass. Take a moment to take some air, look around you, and know that it's in moving out of our comfort zones, which is often where the biggest change happens, and then we get the biggest reward. And so astrology has really helped that with for me as well.
It's interesting what you said about potential versus, I guess, determinism. I think there would understandably be some pushback for people that perhaps view astrology. In fact, I had this conversation yesterday. Maybe it was in my mind because I was going to talk to you today, but I was talking to my friend about it, and she said, like, I reject the idea that I am how I am based on the day that I was born. And obviously, that's a very reductionist way of looking at it. But I think there is understandably some pushback to that. You know, people don't want to be locked into a personality because of their, the day that they were born. And in my experience, when I first became aware of astrology, I think that probably was my reaction as well. Like, oh, I'm born on January 23rd. That means I'm like this. And but the way that you're saying it is that's it's a loose framework of a way that you could or that you may evolve into a certain type of person or live a certain type of life based on some traits. But I think that that's an important distinction that perhaps people don't take the time to understand, is that this isn't like binary code that turns you into
Mm.
a type A or a type B personality. It's something much more nuanced.
Definitely. And I can understand people having a reticence to embrace something that seems like it's like pushing them in some kind of, pre-foretold direction, because we all want that sense of agency and free will. And actually what I find astrology does is it opens that up for me so much more, because for me, life gets more interesting and becomes more nuanced and layered when I have a closer connection to myself and my intuition and this idea of soul and this idea of spirit. And also, kind of, when you open up this idea of like magic, and when I say magic, I don't mean pulling a rabbit out of a hat. I mean the fact that we are all energetic beings. This is true. We are all just energy. Einstein said it, and he was like a science. I don't know how he felt about astrology, but we are all just energetic beings living in a world of energy. We are just recycled energy. No one knows what happens to the soul when we depart this earth, and the fact that the religion and sort of when you look at the sort of ancient tribes, everyone has a concept of what might happen. So it seems pretty, I think it seems reductionist more to think that when we die, then that's it. So I believe in a soul, and I believe that with astrology, the reason that we're born on a certain day at a certain time is because that planetary alignment creates the cradle, it creates the potential for everything that our soul can learn in this lifetime. So my soul was born, or like born into this earth on the day that I came into being, because the planetary alignment means that there are certain traits within me that I have the potential to reach, like, or to expand upon. And also because we're not just dealing with the inner self, we're dealing about what happens out there. Like, the planetary alignment means that there are going to be certain things that come to me in this life and that I'm presented with, that depending on whether I plug into these high vibrations, and when I say high vibrations, I mean things like courage, confidence, bravery, optimism, or I can slip into these low vibrations of fear, anger, judgment, jealousy, manipulation. And these are, we don't like those lower vibration words. We like to think that we're beyond all of them, but we've all shown them at some stage in our life, and we're going to show them again at some stage. And pushing them away and pushing them down isn't going to make them go away. They just have more control over them, over us. So when we can take, so for example, I'm a Scorpio moon. I know that there have been issues with control in my life and wanting to control situations. And I look back now and I'm like, oh yeah, God, actually, especially say like in my early 20s, I can pinpoint some key times. And now I know when I'm presented with a situation that is challenging, I can sometimes sense myself slipping back into that low vibration. And that's when I catch myself. And that's like, oh, this is one of my lessons. This is what I'm here to learn on my journey. Um, how can I break that pattern? How can I make an informed choice that's actually going to move me into a place of power? And the high vibration of Scorpio, which is that it can be very influential and it has a real ability to transform and a real resilience. So instead of trying to slip into the things like control or manipulation, then I can move into the higher vibrations of resilience and power and allowing things to transform. So it's about catching yourself, understanding yourself. And astrology almost gives you this beautiful, it's like a choose your own adventure game, right? You get to kind of decide where you want to go, and you're learning things along the way about yourself. So I totally understand people who have the viewpoint of not wanting to get locked into it. But I think that's also, I assume when people think that it's just all about, say, the day you're born is your sun sign. Okay, so you're a Cancer, you're going to be emotional. Like, it's not necessarily about that. Okay, people born with a sun sign in Cancer, the sun sign is actually where we're going to be able to kind of shine, and it's also what our ego say defaults to. So Cancer does tend to be more nurturing, tends to love to create some sense of tribalism around them, tends to love sort of the domesticity of life a little bit more. The low vibrations can be clinging to the past, or if you think about the sign of the crab, it can be scuttling around things sideways, but then reaching kind of a bit of a passive aggressive approach. So that's your sun. But also in your birth chart, if you've ever seen a birth chart, it's got loads of little symbols all around it. It's a snapshot of the sky the moment you entered the world. And sure, the sun was in one of the zodiac signs, but so was the moon, so was Venus, so was Mercury, so was Jupiter. And each of those planets represents a different facet of your personality. Again, we're working as above, so below, or so inward. And Mercury is the communicator. It's how we think. It's how we connect with others. It's kind of our cognitive processes. It's how we communicate. Venus is the lover. It's all about our relationships, what we might need from relationships, but also our approach to pleasure and to art and to beauty. Mars is the fighter. It's what, we're going to be a warrior about, but it's also where we might slip into aggression or anger or frustration. So each of these planets represents a different facet of your personality. And again, it's like adding to this being that you can become. And imagine if we were all working on some level to be the best communicator, lover, warrior, that we could be. Suddenly society is like up leveling hugely. So this is where I see astrology being this beautiful tool. And I think it's one of those things that you don't even have to believe in it die hard. Just go into it with a bit of open-mindedness and curiosity and get interested about yourself. It's also, I mean, it's a great navel gazing exercise in that you can just sit there with like a birth chart for an hour and just think about yourself. And it's really good fun.
Yeah, it's interesting that the way that you described all of that, I feel that in order for someone to engage with that, there's actually it requires a desire for self-inquiry. And
Mm,
perhaps that's where maybe some of the disconnect has happened over the years, because I think self-inquiry is I believe, such an important practice, not only on an individual level, but on a community level. The more I learn about myself, my strengths and weaknesses, which are, the same thing in different shades, the more I can understand myself, the more I can be kind to myself, be kind to others, the more I can uh, rise to understand my purpose on earth and seek to achieve that. But that's not something that I would have any ability to do if I was engaging with astrology or any other tool, for example, um, in the back of a magazine, for example.
mm.
Like it requires a desire to go deeper. And I think that that's something that maybe on a deeper level is well, it's not a maybe, it's needed. I think it's very important. And one of the things that I love about having someone like you in my life and the social circle that we're a part of is that there is a great deal of self-inquiry, and it we are able to guide each other in that. And that's what really got me, I think, into uh understanding astrology as a way to do that. That's what got me kind of excited about it. And I'm not I don't look at my chart every day. I don't look at everything every day, but it now exists in not the peripheral of my vision, but in my life as a way to interpret things when I feel that I need to. A great example of that is like if I feel a little bit off, or perhaps a little bit more anxious, or a little bit more irritated, that's when maybe I'll start to think, okay, well, like, what's the moon doing? And that's why every now and then I message you and I'm like, Bex, I feel really weird today. Why is this?
Yeah, I'm like, don't worry, babes, it's the planets. There's always at least one planet that's like screwing things up. But
Yeah. Just a little tidbit of information that I thought of when you were speaking before about different civilizations and different ways that we've sought to spiritually understand. And I encourage someone to fact check this. I heard this, and I heard Arthur Brooks say this. It wasn't me, but to my knowledge, there's never been a human civilization that didn't have some form of spirituality, whether that's monotheistic religion or something else. But humans search for meaning, and humans desire to engage with the unknown, and what's greater than the tangible world, the things that we can see and touch, is enduring and has done forever. And I think that's because that these things, they're powerful, and it's a communication. Like when I go and stand outside, I'm fortunate enough to live somewhere, well, you've seen where I live, and in the country, and there's trees and grass and a lake and sky and stuff like that. Like when I go and stand out there, and I just turn my brain off, or try to, and listen. I don't hear nothing. I don't feel nothing. And I think about those moments when I feel in communication with something greater than myself, and that's when the question shifts from why would something like astrology be real to why wouldn't something like astrology be a useful and very relevant way to engage with the wider world and engage with the unknown. And the at that point it stops being an act of faith, and it almost starts to be uh, not scientifically confirmed, but like anecdotally confirmed, because the more that I open myself up to that, the more that that's manifested in my life. And this goes beyond astrology into lots of areas, but the more you are open to it, the more it's just proven to you. And then
Mhm.
it stops being a question of, oh, is this a thing, to, well, how do I use this?
Oh my gosh, that was so beautifully put. I really love listening to you say that, and that resonated hard as well. Um, I think it was Viktor Frankl that said the meaning of life is to give life meaning,
Hmm.
and belief is inescapable for any of us. We need something to believe in. Even when you are appreciating a beautiful piece of art or a beautiful piece of music, that's touching something in your soul. And that's a construction of a human being trying to create this idea of the divine and bring it into something consumable. Which is why we often have like incredibly strong reactions to art or beauty, and why, you know, creators have been there since the beginning of time. When you look at the cave paintings, it's not just a form of communication, it's a way of expressing something that is like so much vaster than us and trying to get it into a way that is like is like palatable but also like accessible, and so we can share, and it's a way of linking with others as well. So for me, it is all about the idea of like finding a belief system and helping you find that purpose and helping you connect with like this beautiful, like vast, unknowable world that we're in, because there's never going to be a right answer, but we are all here to have a human experience. And what is the most beautiful gift of life is that we have a choice in how we accept that experience. And existence and reality is just the lens that we choose to look through life, right? Like, we have the choice whether something is going to cause, it's going to trigger certain things in us. Like, it depends on the way that we're going to look at it, with like optimism or pessimism. And so the reason why I love any of these tools, whether we're talking about astrology, whether we're talking about meditation, it's a way of cleaning that lens. You know, it's a way of, and then being able to like reframe it and think, where am I not giving myself the best chance of loving this experience that I'm in right now? Because we all want happiness. And these tools are just another way of like helping us create that high vibrational frequency of happiness, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I also resonate with what you said about everybody needs a belief system. And immediately what sprung to mind is a couple of close friends I have who may or may not listen to this episode. I know they listen to my podcast, but when they find out that you're an astrologer, they might just be like, nope.
No, rubbish.
um, so yeah, my friends who are, well, one is a scientist, a forensic scientist, and my understanding is that they have built a belief system around science, around reductionist science, and I always find that somewhat ironic in that the the need for something to be proven in a lab becomes a belief system in itself, because it's I wouldn't go so far as to call it dogma, and I'm not individually criticizing anyone at all, but that's that is also a belief system. And so when someone says to me, oh, I don't believe in any of that stuff, like it's not real, it's whatever, I often don't engage with this, but my immediate question that springs up in my mind is, well, you believe in something, because
Exactly.
there is no non-belief. Like, even to say, like, okay, full atheist, like there is no soul, we are just a collection of molecules that seem to randomly sprung together, and we walk around on this planet for 65 years or 80 years if we're lucky, and then we just disintegrate into nothing, and there is nothing of nothing. In order for that, like, that's not proven. And so
Mhm.
if you take that on board as your worldview of your understanding of reality, that's also a belief system. And I find it so interesting that sometimes people seem to be unable to see that. Um, and it seems almost as, at times, dogmatic to me as someone who will go to church 5 times a week and be like, no, God is the creator. Like,
Mm.
that is the way. Like, there's an equal amount of there's an equally big leap that has to be taken in order for that uh, to become your dogma.
Yeah, I totally agree, actually. And I remember listening to a really interesting podcast with Brian Cox, who was discussing the fact that actually science and spirituality don't have to exist on separate planes. They are actually like interchangeable. And even within science, you have to have a belief. And he gave the example of two parallel lines. In science and mathematics, you know, we know that two parallel lines are two lines that are equidistant from each other and just go on and on for infinity. But he was like, the idea of infinity, that's still a belief. You have to believe that infinity exists for that to happen, because you can't prove the parallel lines will be, you know, what parallel lines just suddenly do this. And then science will say like, no, but that's not possible, because you have a belief that it's not going to happen. So, like, belief occurs in everything that we do. But I agree that when you are too dogmatic about either religion or science, you're just putting these blinkers on where you're only choosing to look in this direction. And that closes you off from all the magic that is happening around here. And do you know what? If that's how you want to live your life, I'm not going to turn around and say, no, you're wrong. Because as I said, that's the lens that they're choosing to do so. But I also then really encourage them not to turn around and tell other people that they're wrong, because they have to understand that other people have a different belief system. And I'd also say to them, hey, why not for a week just try and believe that some kind of like crazy shit happens, like astrology could help you understand yourself, or the like meditation does help you plug into this universal idea of love and oneness. And then at the end of that week, see how you feel, and see if you do kind of feel a little bit more connected to yourself and something higher, because that's the beauty of it. And it just feels like this wonderful, yeah, gift that you're given, and I just want to share that with others. So I'm not in any way trying to go around recruiting people for like my astrology club, like get on board my spaceship with me. It's more like, guys, hey guys, you want to know something really fun that you can do that's going to up level your experience on this planet? Let me share it with you. And if you don't want to take it, that's absolutely fine. Maybe something will be planted that one day you actually are curious about going back to it. And that's like, that's how I like to fulfill my role as an astrologer on planet Earth.
Okay, so let's say there was someone who was listening to us or had come across your work or perhaps another astrologer and they did want to jump on the spaceship. How would, but they didn't really have an understanding of what that meant or how to engage with that. Where would somebody start?
To start thinking about astrology and kind
Yeah.
of get curious about it. I would say the best thing to do to like begin with is to just start to get to know your own birth chart, because then that's when your curiosity becomes piqued, and that's when it starts to really make sense for you. And what that means is going on to a website. I'm sure, like, if you've got links in your notes and things, I can send you so people can have a little look. AstroSeek, for example, is a really, really good one. And then you just need your date, place, and time of birth. And time of birth is important because that signifies your rising sign, which is the sign that was like rising over the eastern horizon when you were born. And your rising sign is all about your motivation for life. It's where you are going to feel most geared towards like your purpose and the direction that you want to go in. And it's also how you rise to meet the occasion. It's the kind of thing that's going to get you up out of bed in the morning. Whereas your sun sign is linked to your purpose, it's linked to your ego, it's linked to your talents. And your moon sign is much more about how you nurture others, where you need nurture, how you can feel more emotionally secure. So those are known as your big three. And once you get an idea of your big three, you start to, they're kind of like the building blocks of who you are as an individual when it comes to the ego and talents, the direction and motivation, and the need for security and nurture. And then you can look on this birth chart and you can see what sign they're in, what zodiac sign they're in. And that's going to first of all give you the framework of the kind of person that you can become or might be showing signs of already. So if you're a sun Aquarius, you might really resonate with that whole thing of like being quite innovative, being quite like future forward, thinking outside of the box, not being like to tie down to certain things. And then say you're a Cancer moon, those are the things that I mentioned about maybe like for safety and security, you need to feel like you have some kind of home base, or you need to feel like you are connected in some way to a space that you can retreat to. It can mean that you live in the past a little bit, or you can hold on to things from the past. So you might want to see where that's influencing you at the moment. It also means that you kind of need that time away to reconnect with your emotions a little bit more. You need time to really, really recharge. If you're feeling super drained, if you're feeling more antagonistic with others, ask yourself, when was the last time I just had a whole afternoon of me doing me? And sometimes that can be difficult. So, for example, if you are a Gemini or a Libra rising, then your motivation is often about connecting with others and going out there and becoming like curious about the world, and or sort of making other people feel good about themselves. So it's a way of balancing all of this. So you start to build this framework and understanding yourself. And then you can go on to the other planets. So, for example, Mercury, Venus. The outer planets are more like Jupiter, which shows where you can find luck, or where you might end up being a teacher to others, or where you can impart your own wisdom, or where you're going to find abundance in life. Saturn shows where you might feel more challenged, or where you might face restrictions a little bit, but also when you move past the difficulties that Saturn presents, you can make real long-term success in life. So Saturn kind of shows you where the elephant in the room might be when it comes to what it is that you want to focus on in your life, because often we don't like focusing on the things that don't bring us confidence. But it's actually saying, like, when you turn this lens towards that for a little bit and work on it, that's when you're going to end up seeing like much bigger results further on. So I would say for anyone curious, go onto one of these websites. You're going to get this like sort of this circular diagram, which is going to be divided into houses. And the houses are these 12 segments that also shows the area in your life that this is most prevalent. So to go back to that example from before, say you've got this Aquarius sun in your 10th house. This is the house or the area of your life that's to do with career. So it actually means that you're very innovative or trend led when it comes to your professional life. If that same sun was in your 4th house of home and family, it might actually mean that you tend to have a more interesting or like unusual family setup or family situation, because Aquarius is also kind of linked to things that are a little bit like off the wall. So you kind of see where the planets are and which sign they're in to tell you how they're going to behave. And then you see the house to see how that's going to show up in your life. And that might be in financial situations, it could be in how you express joy, it could be in your home life, it could be to do with your profession, it could be to do with your health, your relationships. So again, you're kind of like, it's all these little building blocks that you're constructing this idea of yourself from. And then you can go through and you're probably going to be pretty surprised, like, oh wow, yeah, I really do resonate with being a Venus in Aries, which means you're quite like passionate and sort of fiery when it comes to relationships. And if it's in the 5th house of kind of drama, then it means that, yeah, I do have a lot of drama in my relationships. Oh, interesting. But again, that doesn't mean that you're fated to always have like combustible dramatic relationships. You then look into the higher vibrational signs, which is that you can also have like wonderfully passionate romantic love affairs when you find your person, and they just need to understand that you're someone that needs to be like lit up and feel like quite motivated in a relationship, or need to have like independence in relationships. So I would say that'd be a great place for anyone to start, if you're a believer or you're not a believer, just to see what resonates with you.
Yeah, I think the compatibility piece is interesting there because that's certainly something that, at the very least, people engage with as kind of like harmless fun. Like you meet someone, and you're like, "Oh, let's see how compatible we are." But one of the very first things you said in this conversation was that nobody is incompatible with anybody else, and I'd love it if you could just speak to that for a couple of minutes on the compatibility piece, because I think that's probably one of the first ways that people do engage with star signs, at least on a surface level.
Yeah, I mean, of course it is, because if we're not trying to understand ourselves, we're trying to understand our significant other so that we can have a more harmonious relationship, right? And it's interesting, like I've been asked to write a lot of pieces for sort of different media outlets all over the world, and the thing that I get asked the most is, can you do like compatibility star signs? Who are you most compatible with? Who should never get together? And I always preface each piece with, there is never there are, two signs that absolutely should never ever be together. That just doesn't exist. There are some signs that are going to have an easier time of it, perhaps, that like they're going to rub up against each other in an easier way. But also, we're talking about this high vibrations and their low vibrations, right? So even if you have two signs on the surface of it should be really good together, say for, I mean, it's hard because you can make matches for any of the signs. Say, for example, a Virgo and a Gemini. They're both ruled by Mercury. They're both very cerebral. They're both going to love like the conversational style of a relationship. They're both going to need like words of affirmation, for example. But then Geminis can be quite flighty, and they can be very social. They can also not like to be pinned down. They can like lots of different options. They can change their mind at the last time, whereas Virgos need that organization. So that can be an issue. But I'm not going to turn around and say, okay, we'll just never date a Gemini if you're a Virgo. You have to just understand each other. And this is where the understanding comes in. You have to, acknowledge on both sides that, okay, as a Virgo, I want to make plans. But actually, what can I learn about my Gemini partner? Sometimes they like to switch things up at the last minute. And what a great lesson for me to, notice that sometimes you do need to be adaptable. Equally for a Gemini, they might find it really difficult when their Virgo partner is trying to pin in a date for the diary 3 weeks down the line. But how about they say, okay, sure, like let's put this in the diary, even though it makes me feel a little bit like, then I'm up for it. But also, can we have a random date next week where we just decide last minute what we do? And sure, it might be challenging for each of them, but also the challenges are where you learn about yourself. And naturally, that's where you can grow stronger as a pair as well, because you're helping each other grow in that way and you're having understanding of each other. So there are always ways that star signs can complement each other, and there's always going to be ways that star signs can aggravate each other. And this is where birth charts come in really useful, because you can have a conversation with your partner. You can be like, okay, so you're a Taurus, you really love often it's associated with like either the finer things in life or comfort or again stability, whereas your Sagittarius partner might just want like adventure and might just want to do things off of the cuff. So you say, all right, I understand that you're going to need a bit of sort of stability. Why don't we have one night in this week where we do whatever it is that you want to do and just get cozy, and then how about we plan an adventure date for the week after? And it just becomes a bit of fun, and it, like, it makes you, grow as a pair, I would say.
To zoom out on that a little bit, yeah, I truly believe that the challenge shows the way. And, if you're born into a certain house and you are more inclined to do things in a certain way, then the way that you're not inclined to do that is the challenge for you. And that's the area that you have been put on this earth to grow into. And so, I mean, I don't know about you, but relationships are, are probably one of the best ways to find something that challenges you for sure is to is to get into an intimate relationship with somebody.
Oh my gosh. I mean, if anyone holds a mirror up to you, it is your partner, which can be very confronting, but it can also be very rewarding. And it's when you stop and take a long, hard look in that mirror rather than trying to like turn away from it or trying to force your viewpoint or force your idea of how, because that's just the ego getting through, right? Like
Mhm.
relationships are like the most humbling way of dissolving the ego, because sometimes you have to turn around and be like, wow, I always thought I was like this, and I thought that everyone else assumed I was too, and suddenly I've got this person showing me that maybe this isn't the most desirable quality, or maybe it comes across as this. And that's a lot, because then that's like destroying this ego idea that's been trying to keep us safe. And we have to accept that maybe we need to adapt a little bit, or maybe the way that we thought we were being viewed by others isn't quite the way that is in reality. So it is like it's confronting, but also, like you say, it's like the most radical way of embracing change and self-acceptance and transformation.
Yeah, the transformation is ongoing. That's for sure.
As it should be. We're constantly changing beings. So, and what's great is, you can see it like two tree roots. As you grow, I feel like astrology helps you intertwine and support each other rather, or not roots, branches rather, rather than like growing in kind of like separate directions like this and then potentially growing outwards. And this is where relationships, struggle suddenly. And it's happened with, I'm sure we've all been in a relationship at some stage, or we know people that have started off just fine and thought were really compatible. And then they just like grew apart and they started having their own friendship groups, they started having their own hobbies, and there was just like nothing that really drew them together. Even though at the core basis of it, there was still a lot of love there. And so what astrology can help you do, if you are wanting to stay together, it helps you acknowledge that there are ways that you can stay intertwined. You can still have your own life. It doesn't mean that you're like die hard connected to one another, but it helps you appreciate the things in one another that you fell in love with in the first place, and it keeps that fresh throughout life as well. So you can be together for like a year or for 20 years or for 50 years, and you're still discovering things about each other, because astrology reminds us that it's a constant journey of discovery. And when you get to do that with your partner, that's when the best relationships are made.
Mm, yeah, I feel like that's very true. I've been in a relationship for nearly 12 years and I still feel that every day is a school day. But you have to be open to it, right? There's days when I'm not, and that's really on me. But there are days when I'm not open to that learning and not open to that communication. But when I'm able to sit in that, I don't think that the learning ever stops. And it's as much learning about myself as it is about my partner, Haley, and learning how, uh, I hesitate to say how like how I trigger her and she triggers me, or how I care for her and how she cares for me. Because really, like when to say, oh, someone triggered me, it's more like, well, I'm the one that has the reaction. It is sort of on me. It's also on if I communicate that to her, it's also on her to try to remember that and move through her own journey to get to a point where she does that less, and so on and so on. But yeah, to your point, it's the learning never stops, and the self inquiry and the self transformation never stops. I believe that's how people do can stay together in a healthy way for the rest of their lives, because I've seen examples of people who don't stay together or stay together in an unhealthy way, but to do so in a healthy way, I think that is very, very important.
Totally. And it also stops this kind of like the like verbal attacks that can occur in relationships of, well, you're always like this, or you always do this, or I knew you were going to do this because you do this all the time, or well, I'm not even going to ask you because you're just going to say this or do this, which is so like negative for a successful relationship. So it's just closing yourself off from offering your partner a platform to speak, and it's also shutting them down, and it's making them resistant to having any like communication with you. So when you open yourself up to this idea that we're constantly transforming and we're constantly changing, then you're able to say, so you know, you're still able to have that curiosity about one another, and acknowledge that, okay, so maybe they do have a certain fallback of what they say and what they do, but there's always a chance to open their awareness to it if you do it in a compassionate, gentle way, and saying like, rather than this, how about we approach it in this direction? And again, that's when we can go back to astrology. We can look at their Venus signs, their moon signs. We can maybe start to understand why they might have that tendency to fall back on those traits, and we can assess the higher vibration of their moon and their Venus, and then that's when you can start to draw out that side of them and help them step into their higher being, and they're going to love you for that as well.
Yeah, I agree. It's challenge, but it's definitely worth it. All right, so let's talk about change and transformation. I feel like we've kind of circled around this issue and almost got not issue circled around this topic and almost got there and almost haven't. But it's such an interesting topic that's so prevalent on my mind, and in my soul at the moment. This idea of change and transformation, because uh, I've recently realized sometimes I look back on my life and I look at periods of upheaval and I look at periods of relative calm and stillness, and I've created this habit of thinking that for me, change and transformation has been this cataclysmic change and then relax and sort of relax into that, and more cataclysmic change and then relax into that. And to some degree that's true, but at the same time I'm starting to understand that the change and transformation is constant, and we are, always learning. And every experience now, I feel like I can pin in my life almost every experience that I've had, with the exception of, something small and insignificant, like knocking over something. But everyone that I've met, every place that I've gone, and everything that I've done or everything that I've not done has in some ways been a lesson. And sometimes it's a big lesson, and sometimes it's a small lesson, and sometimes it's a lesson that I need to learn 6 times or 10 times or potentially for the rest of my life. And it's such an interesting way to engage with my own life, because now I'm getting to the point where I can appreciate the challenge as a mechanism for change and transformation, even as it's happening. And so I want to talk to you
Mm.
about that, because obviously your life in the last few months has been, arguably very tumultuous. And yet, when we've talked about the things that you've been going through in the last few months, as well as expressing understandable, fear at times, or nervousness, you've also been so good at and so ready to talk about this idea of this being the challenge, this being the lesson, this being the transformation. And so I think that it's definitely something that we should speak to. So um, in the last few months, you obviously have had some pretty serious and scary medical sort of developments, and I would love for you to just talk to me about that for a minute, and then let's get into how you navigate that.
Okay, yeah, let's go for it. So it actually all happened in March, which was key eclipse time. And big change tends to happen over eclipses. Eclipses cause these things I like to call karmic curveballs, where the rug just gets pulled out from under us in some fashion or other. And that is because it's asking us to take a massive pivot in life, whether that is a pivot in our mindset or like literally in the situation that we're in. Eclipses are just supercharged full moons or new moons, and they are eclipses because they get close to the sun and the moon are near to the nodes of fate, which, as you know, the name suggests, they help like move us forward on our fated pathway. It's all this idea of the soul's journey, the spirit's journey. And over full moons, we tend to embrace huge changes where something ends or something has to be released. And on new moons, there are fresh starts and new beginnings. And the eclipses for me were happening in my sixth and 12th houses, which is the house of health, of wellness, of routine, of hospitals, of near death experience. And in March, beginning of March, I got super sick. I was in India, where we met and where I lived for 6 months of the year. And I'd ended up contracting an infection that had then um, moved on to sepsis, and I almost got septic shock. So I was hospitalized. The numbers were like staggeringly scary. I think like, yeah, they were like off the chart, and I was having really bad fevers, and it was pretty dicey for a little bit of that time. And I ended up then having to come back from India a month early. I was supposed to be going up to the mountains, whereas actually ended up having to come back for a biopsy because I've had a kidney transplant, which I had when I was really young. So I've had the transplant for the better part of my life. But in getting the sepsis and looking at the blood work, we noticed that actually the kidney was under huge strain and was leaking a lot of protein. So whether that was actually as a result of the sepsis or whether it had been happening before for some time, and then getting this illness flagged it, which I also is completely possible. And then again, what a gift from the universe that I like got ill enough to notice this. And it's this kind of reminder that in every, you know, it's this every cloud idea, right? In every darker situation, you're being given the chance to like see the light in some way. So then had to come home, back to the UK, and have like various tests, and we still haven't figured out actually what it is. So I'm still in this state, like this liminal state of not knowing. But for me, I find this the most incredible lesson in surrender and acceptance, that you can't always know what's going on with you, and also that the very strong emotions can exist at the same time. They don't cancel each other out. So you can be living with a lot of fear about what's occurring in your health, or that, you know, for me it was health. Maybe you're living in a lot of fear of what's happening financially or in relationships, but that doesn't mean that that has to be the overriding feeling that you're only going to be allowed to feel. You can experience moments of joy in there as well. You know, even when I was in hospital, my friends rallied around so much, you know, Haley included. She was there like spending the night with me in hospital. She was the one like applying these damp cloths to me when I was like overheating so much and I wasn't allowed any more medicine. um, and when I look back, the thing I'm going to remember about that time is actually nothing to do with the illness. It is the beauty and the heart and the soul that happened from my friendship group. And I feel so lucky to have experienced that. So I think what that led me on to think about was, you know, this reminder, the emotions that come and go like clouds, like the weather. They can bypass through us, but they don't have to live in us. And again, it was that reminder that we get to choose where we put the lens. Am I going to have this um like catastrophic view of, oh my god, my health could be failing, what am I going to do, I can't go back to England yet, I'm stuck in India because I'm not fit to fly. You know, I could have spent every day for 2 weeks worrying about that. what is that going to do to my mindset and also to my physical body? I have a choice. All right, it's not the ideal situation, but I'm also just getting to rest here. I'm going deeper into my meditation practice. I am spending amazing time with my friends. I can see it in that perspective as well. And even then, like coming back to the UK, it wasn't part of my plan, but I actually spent the 6 weeks there rather than being up in the mountains where I would have been like super social and where it would have been like fun. A huge part of me for a long time has been wanting to really sit down and connect with my novel, as you know. And I just haven't been doing it because I've been prioritizing other things in my life. And this is where we get into something a bit bigger than well, not bigger, but a different astrology, this idea of like manifestation and co-creation with the universe. In that, with this whole idea of like, when we manifest things in our life, it's not necessarily just the universe giving us something that we have to accept. We are the universe. We are just the universe experiencing itself in an energetic form. And so the way that actually I started to think about it is that there was a part of me that drastically wanted to work on my novel. And I know that there were frustrations in me that I wasn't doing this, but my Libra rising was like, no, I want to go and have fun. I want to like explore with my friends. I want to like be social. And that frustration was bubbling up. And I was giving off this energetic charge to the universe, like, I want to sit down, I want to work on my novel. And so I feel like I created and manifested this situation where my body got sick so that I could then go home. And then I was gifted with this 6 weeks where I got so much done and had this like enforced period of solitude and creativity. And I am so grateful for it because it was amazing. And this is where you can take any situation in life and you can be like, sure, I can look at it as being detrimental to me, or I can look at it that it was like this incredible gift. And I think that's like, yeah, where mindset is just something that naturally comes into my world and into my life. I've always had an optimistic mindset. I was lucky enough to be brought up in a spiritual household where my dad was always like, you know, your mindset is everything. You get to choose. What are you going to choose? No one can make you feel happy. No one can make you feel sad. It is the way that you react to things that is that is how your life is gonna unfold. And as a teenager, that is the last thing I wanted to hear. When I'd just been dumped and I'm like raging, and my dad's there like, no one can make you feel angry. And I'm like, what are you on about? I'm livid. But it makes so much sense. It is, and this is why it's a continual practice. And this is why the self-analysis is so important, because it helps you notice your reaction to things. So to go back to your initial question about health, um, I also see it as what I mentioned earlier. My soul came into this life at this point so it could experience certain things. That these challenges with health are there so that I can step into my highest vibration with them and look at things optimistically. And suddenly, what is a challenge, I'm grateful for it. So it's all about having gratitude in life. It's all about seeing, what is this teaching me? What lesson did my soul choose to learn in this particular scenario?
All right, so talking about mindset, it's very easy, I think, in hindsight to look back at an experience and go, "Wow, this really challenging thing was ultimately good for me." And I believe there are really no bad experiences, but being able to drop into that in the moment when you are in hospital or you have that uncertainty is perhaps a little bit harder. And you talked about having been raised with this idea of mindset. And so that almost seems, my initial thought is that that seems quite fortuitous because, I wasn't raised with that idea or that attitude or that concept. And probably most people, most millennials were not. And so how would someone who, for whom mindset doesn't perhaps come as naturally as it might for you, when they're faced with their own unique challenging situation, how would someone go about really trying to drop into that in the moment, and rather than lean into the fear and the anxiety and the unknown, lean more into the gratitude or more into the surrender? Because I think surrender is probably the key word there.
Mm. God, that's actually a good question. That's actually, I have to have a little think about that, because for me, it's so ingrained. It's I guess it's almost like a language to me that I was taught from a young age. And it's so interesting that you say fortuitous, because I do see it as fortuitous. But one of the huge reasons I'm able to have this approach is because I got really sick when I was 8 years old and my kidneys started failing. And I spent, from the ages of 8 to 14 in and out of hospital. I was in hospital as much as I was out of hospital. And I was living in there like a lot of the time with my dad, who is this like amazing source of knowledge for all of these things. So it's fortuitous, but also it came at the cost of a lot of difficulty. But I still look back on that and see it as a blessing. I didn't at the time though, because I was very young. I find it really, really hard. And I think we have to remember that, like, to constantly have compassion with ourselves. Like, you're in a situation, it's not the way that you want to go. You're feeling like fear. Let's say fear is coming up, and fear is such an insidious emotion because it like grips us and it makes us feel stuck and it makes us feel completely out of control. So I think when you're in a moment like that and in a situation like that, it's just to stop, to ground, to be in your body, to take a deep breath, and to remember that often we start catastrophizing things that are going to happen. So we let fear pull our minds away from the present, and or we let anxiety pull our minds towards things from the past, and then we exist in this space that is neither, it's not here, it's either forward or back. And then that's like really, really dysregulating for us. So if you can just drop down and be in the moment and be like, right, I'm in a challenging situation. This isn't going to last forever. Let me just like acknowledge my emotions. Let me understand that they're here. Make space for them. Welcome them. You can even give you like, anamorphize it, like give your emotion a kind of like animal spirit. So you feel fear. I used to imagine fear as like this little black cat. And rather than trying to shoo it away, I'd be like, you know what? Come sit with me. You can sit here. There's space for you. I'm gonna understand that, because then also that it's not part of you. It's something that exists externally. And then you can start to get curious and be like, okay, there was a time when I didn't feel this fear. So there will be a time when I no longer feel this fear either. I feel this because of like the way that my mind is telling me that things are gonna go. Like it's how it's like I said, catastrophizing. But how about if I just breathed, if I was just in the moment and I let this pass through me, and I had faith and a trust and a belief that at some stage I'm gonna exist without this feeling. And I think that's just like such a good way of constantly reminding ourselves that we are not our emotions. We are our reaction to our emotions. And so if you can take a moment to say, okay, I acknowledge this, I understand. I had a moment the other day where something occurred and I was gripped with anxiety. And rather than trying to distract myself, which I think what a lot of us try and do, it's not about the distraction. It's about acknowledging it, saying, okay, that's interesting. Why am I having this reaction? What happened in my past, or what am I afraid of happening that is making me feel this? And then be like, ask yourself, is there any truth in what I'm feeling? Or am I constructing this in my mind? And then a really good technique that I learned, is an NLP technique, so neuro linguistic programming, is you can ask yourself and you can say the words, how would it be if I chose not to be fearful right now? What would it feel like if I wasn't a fearful being? And then you kind of ask yourself and you're like, okay, interesting. It would feel like this. And you instantly, like, try it next time. It's amazing. You instantly feel yourself relax into the moment and acknowledge that there is another way of being. And it might only be for a split second, but that split second is all you need to remember that fear does not own you. And it's the same with anything. It can be the same with like a jealousy that sparks up. Ask yourself, what would it feel like if I wasn't a jealous person right now? And suddenly you're like, oh, it would feel like that. And then you go back to being jealous a bit more. But you constantly remind yourself. And I find that one of the best tools for mindset, actually, to keep on questioning and to understand that you have a choice.
Yeah, I think the key uh point of that stuck with me then is understanding the need that you might have to do this uh constantly, at least to start with, and that's
Oh, yeah.
okay. But it's not a quick fix. Like, in my own experiences with anxiety around, say, health issues that I've experienced, the that initial moment of relief from that fear or anxiety or catastrophizing is sometimes just a moment, but it is enough to kind of grab and hold on to, and then you do it again. And there's a specific day I recall relatively recently where, practicing this stuff, I might have done this several hundred times in a day, sort of accepted or like caught myself in that, downward spiral again of anxious thinking, and then was able to remove myself from that for a few seconds, perhaps at a time, maybe 300 times a day. But then the next day, it's easier. And then the next day, it's
Mhm.
easier. And then the next day, it's easier. And it's not a linear progression curve. Like, recovery from something like this doesn't just, go up at a smooth angle. It's more of a kind of a wave where you peak a little higher, and then perhaps your next low is also a little higher, and the next high is a little higher, and the next low is a little higher, and then, well, you might have a little dip and go a bit lower, but it's more of a wave and an upward graph. But it does require that consistency, and I think that's the key to mindset is um the constant awareness, I think, and then also the constant compassion, forgiveness. Like, if you're frustrated at yourself that this is the sixth or seventh time in the last hour that you've had to catch those problematic thoughts, and you get irritated with yourself or shame yourself for that, well, that's not going to help, really, is it?
Exactly. That is just, remember that you want to be on your own team in this. Like, you are your own best teammate. So support yourself in it. And you're totally right about it needing to be a repetitive thing. What we're talking about essentially is mindfulness. And mindfulness is a practice. And what does practice mean? That we have to do it again and we do it again and we do it again. It's not that you just get mindfulness. It's not that you complete mindfulness. It is something that you work on. And it's just like a muscle that needs to be worked consistently. If you go to the gym and you go, 5 times a week for a month, at the end of that month, you're going to feel great because you've built up that like strength, that resilience. If then you have like 2 months off and you try and go back to it, of course you're not going to be lifting what you were before. So you have to understand that's the same thing with mindfulness. But in the same way that we have muscle memory, we also have like mindfulness memory. We're like we're opening those neuro pathways to allow us to connect with that sense of optimism, of hope, of belief. And so once you've done that, once you've opened those neuro pathways, it becomes so much easier to reconnect with them when we're in challenging situations.
Yeah, the muscle memory piece is very relevant, and it's interesting because in my life I've often find that in a time of challenge, I engage more with mindfulness, mindset, various different ways to move through that. And then that becomes a very healthy practice or a series of healthy practices. And then I feel better, or the challenge passes, and then I coast for a little while. And then, well, maybe you're not so concerned about mindfulness, or maybe you're not so concerned about meditating, or, maybe you get busy and you don't think about these things so much. And then, in a way, you atrophy, and then or that skill atrophies the way that a muscle atrophies, and then another challenge comes along and you're like, oh yeah, how did I get through this last time? I did it. I did more meditating, I did more journaling, I prioritized movement, I prioritized being social, or being alone, or whatever, and you kind of remember, and then you sort of
Mm.
drop back in. And it's so funny because, like, if I often wonder, like, had I maybe not like let that slip, then perhaps the initial shock of like, whoa, like this thing happening in my life would perhaps not be so hard. But that's not that's not realistic. Like, for starters, there's so many different things that sort of occupy our lives. Like, in an ideal world, I would have 6 hours a day every day to practice meditation, to write, to practice movement, to spend time outside, to like cook the food that I want to cook, to do all these things that keeps me at optimum. But until I'm a multi-million dollar podcaster, I just don't have the time for that stuff. You got to make money. I have relationships, like I have things that are happening in my life. But so I guess we use these things. We seem to gravitate towards these practices when we need them most, and
Mm.
that's okay. But I wonder if we could find that 5% extra, or maybe that 10% extra sometimes, to keep that practice up in the times when we're coasting, when the times when we are swimming downstream, perhaps it would be easier the next time the tide turns.
I definitely agree with you. And this is where we use our toolkit, right? So for me, astrology, I check my chart each morning. This just gives me an idea. So far we've talked about birth charts. You also have these things called transit charts, which has your birth chart in the middle, and around the outside it shows where the planets are at this specific moment. And it's this idea that wherever the planet is in relation to your own planets has an effect on how you might be feeling that day, or has an effect on your cognitive process. Say your say you have Neptune in the cosmos at the moment, it's just moved into Aries. If Neptune is forming a direct opposition with your natal Mercury, which is how you think, Neptune is the planet of blurred boundaries and of confusion. When you know this is happening, it kind of can signal you might have a few days of like being extra creative and imaginative, but also of just not being able to make decisions or being a little bit foggier in your head. So this again, it gives me this tool to be like, okay, do you know what? Today I'm not going to get mad at myself if I can't make a decision. What I am going to do is I'm just going to be like really creative and like brainstorm all these different ideas for my visions, because that's what is one of the gifts of this transit. And it enables me to kind of gear myself towards how the planets are behaving in my everyday life. And that's one of the tools that I use for reconnection, for mindfulness. Having a little, even if you can only do a 10-minute meditation each morning, that's better than nothing. And so I think it's all about like understanding the tools that you need to feel grounded and centered in yourself. And this is where I find astrology really useful. Let's go back to that example of when you're feeling a sense of fear, or a sense of anxiety. I know as a Virgo sun, I thrive and I feel a sense of comfort when I make a list about something or when my space is really clear. So when I had this sort of flush of anxiety the other day, I was like, okay, sit with it, acknowledge it. This is happening. Interesting. Why is this? Some things came up of like why I might be feeling it. I was like, all right, I can work through those. Now, what are the active things that I can do to make myself feel better? I haven't unpacked yet. I just moved over here to Portugal for a month. I'm going to go and unpack my room because I know that when I looked around, everything is organized, when it's tidy. I know for me, in my chart, but also just as an individual, that makes me feel so much better. So I went and did that. And I was like, I'm also just going to make a list of all these things that are scrambling around my brain and I'm going to put them onto paper. And I did those two things and I instantly felt so, so much better. So once you understand your own toolkit, then it means that at any given time you can just imagine it like an artist toolkit with like or an artist that sort of that roll they have and they open it, it's got their brushes there, or you might do it with tools. You just whip it open and you're like, okay, what am I gonna pick? What am I gonna use that's gonna make me feel better? And it's just amazing. It means that these things that we get confronted with in life, suddenly we become like architects of our own destiny a little bit more rather than feeling overwhelmed by it.
Yeah, that's so true. I love the analogy of the opening the toolkit and spreading it out and being like, "Oh, what am I going to use today?" In my experience,
Yeah.
I sometimes pick the wrong tool first, or a lesser effective tool, and then that doesn't work. I'm like, "Okay, I'm going to try this other thing," and sometimes I'll do two or three renditions of that until I find the thing, and then I'm like, "Oh, that's right. I've been here before."
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for me, it's also things like I know I need to exercise pretty regularly. That's classic for Virgo. It's a sign of health, and I also have Jupiter in my sixth house. So I know that a lot of the time when I'm feeling that sense of disequilibrium inside, if I'm feeling a bit dysregulated, it's maybe because I haven't like moved enough in the last few days. But sometimes I'm feeling really lazy and I just can't be asked. So that's when I pick a few other tools and I'm like, oh, I don't know, I'll just like look at my tarot cards instead, or oh, I just do, and I'm still not feeling. Actually, when I really engage and I ask myself, usually I've had a little voice, like my intuition has been saying right from the beginning of the day, go out and exercise, go and do a workout. But I've been like, no, 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 I'm going to just try these other things first. And then finally it's like, okay, I hear you. I'm going to do this. I go for a run. I feel on top of the world. So this is a case of when we often know which tool that we need to use, and our intuition is often telling us, but we decide that we're going to try one of the other ones first because it's a little bit easier. So this is how connecting with intuition is also really useful for these times.
Yeah, intuition has been a big word for me recently of really learning to, I would say, go with my gut and, yeah, intuition, go with your gut, whatever you want to call it. But there's the difference between what I call the loud voice and the quiet voice. The loud voice being my ego, my fear response, anger, frustration, various emotions, various reactions, and the inner voice is just the quiet voice, I should say, is just always somewhere deep inside of me, just very calmly saying, Matt, just do this. And then I ignore it. And it's like, that's okay. Just do this. And it just keeps like calmly and compassionately like pointing the way. And it's a real skill that I feel it's a real skill to learn to be able to listen to that when the loud voice is just really clamoring for attention. And it's constant. It's even uh it could be such the smallest things in your life, like, oh, it's 9:30 p.m. and you're home alone, and so, well, I'm home alone, and so my mind is bored and it wants stimulation, and so like the loud voice will be like, oh, like, go do something on your phone or go do something on your laptop, and the quiet voice is like, it's bedtime, like, it's time to downregulate. Or even a much greater idea of, like, recently in this experience that Haley and I have of buying a house for the first time, making decisions with huge amounts of money. And there was this moment when our real estate agent was telling us, like, we put an offer on a house, the sellers came back with a higher counter offer, and the real estate agent was saying, you need to match this. Like, this is what you should do. Like, as the expert here, I'm telling you, this is what you should do. And I felt so conflicted about it. And obviously, because we're dealing with large amounts of money, it's a big decision, but like more than I should, because I felt there was an inherent no that was being spoken from deeper inside of me. And honestly, in the end, I was just sitting here like hands together on my forehead like this, like, what does my gut say? And my gut
Yeah.
said, just hold your ground, like, it's going to be okay. And I didn't know what it's going to be okay meant. I didn't know that it's going to be okay meant you'll get the house or you won't get the house and it's going to be okay. But I knew that that was the action that was going to lead towards the aligned path. And so I did it. And in the end, it worked out. But more so, it's that moment of quietening down, trying to down regulate and trying to go inside and listening to intuition. And like, there's a, and in my experience, there's an answer for every problem in deeper inside, and it's intuition. But it takes time to learn to listen to that, because we're not shown how to do that, and we're not encouraged to do that in our lives from a young age, or as adults at all.
Mm. I completely agree with that. And I love how you said there the whole thing of like, this will be okay. And you didn't know if that meant that you would get what you want, or potentially what you don't think you want, but maybe what you need. And
Mm.
this is this whole thing of like, the universe will give you not necessarily what you want, what you need. Luckily, in this situation, it happened that what you need and what you want correlate, and they were the same thing. But again, this is where the whole trust comes in. Trust that you are being led towards something higher, something better for yourself, even if it's not what your brain wants right now. And I think that's, yeah, when you say that the loud and the quiet voice, I see it as like the high and the low voice. So the high voice is the ones that are up here and it's chattering and it's in my mind, it's my monkey mind and it's my ego, and it's the thing that's like clamoring for attention. And the low voice is the one that comes from in here. And actually, I hear it as being lower and deeper. This is all kind of like chattery, like little like monkeys or birds kind of tweeting. And this is the one that when it's 9:30 and your brain's going, oh no, but you want a dopamine hit, go on your phone for a little bit or go distract yourself, or you're not ready to sleep. Your lower voice is like, it's rest time. This is where it is that sense. And this is one of the key things about meditating. Meditation isn't just to chill out and relax and feel good for like half an hour. It's a way of moving from this ego, like cognitive driven state, into bringing the world to the single point within where we can really, really connect with like the depths of ourselves and start listening and understanding from this area rather than up here, which is why it's so essential to have that for me as a practice. And why I like to do it each morning, like I said, even if it's for 10 minutes, it doesn't need to be for like a full hour, because it's just that way of reconnecting to myself and reminding myself that any given point in the day, if I just need to take a hot minute and take a break and just be like, and plug in, I always have the chance to. And this is where this practice of intuition comes about.
Yeah, I totally agree. Okay, Bex. Well, it's been a real pleasure having you on the Journey podcast. Thank you so much for being here. And if someone wanted to follow you or find you, where would they do that?
They want to direct all their scientific hate tweets to me. No, it's all
Either
good.
or.
Come drop by my Instagram, which is cosmic_cures. And yeah, just like send me a little DM, say hi, see what it's all about. That's probably the best way. Yeah, or like pop me an email, bex@cosmiccures.co.uk. And you can reach out with questions about astrology. You can connect to chat about having your own birth chart read. Or if you've just got any questions that have come up about this, then I'd love to hear from you. But yeah, I'm always here to open the conversation about astrology and to facilitate anyone else's learning journey with it. So thank you so much for creating this platform for me to speak on, Matt. You're an incredible host, and I've loved every minute of it. Can't wait to do more of this IRL with a glass of wine in hand.
It's my pleasure. I'll make sure that those links are in the show notes, and I'm sure that you will be on the Journey podcast again sometime in the future. I love you lots, Bex, and it's always a
I love you
pleasure.
too, my darling. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Journey podcast. For links and information about today's episode, check out the show notes below. If you'd like to support this podcast, the easiest and most impactful way to do so is to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and leave a review or comment. Or please share your favorite episodes with friends, family, or on social media. That's also incredibly helpful. If you'd like to get in touch or you'd like to read my book, Last Train North, the easiest way to get into all of that is at my website, matthewchanner.com. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next episode. Until then, enjoy the journey.